Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China says it's ready to welcome top EU leaders at an appropriate time as it looks to thaw ties, marking 50 years of formal relations with the bloc. China has condemned Israel's military operations in Gaza after Israeli forces announced an expanded campaign that would displace most of the enclave's population. South Korea's former prime minister seeks a conservative alliance to take on a liberal frontrunner Lee Jae-myung as the presidential race heats up. And Hong Kong Monetary Authority intervenes heavily to rein back the local currency amid growing downward pressure on the greenback. Also in East Asia tonight, China claims a historic first World Snooker Championship. Zhao Xintong's victory igniting Chinese social media platform Weibo, which fans hope could mark a watershed moment for the sport in the country. And tech entrepreneurs and investors are stepping into the spotlight at the Founders Forum in Singapore. Asian players are proving that the race for AI dominance isn't just between US and China. China says it would welcome visits by top EU leaders at a time it deems appropriate as Beijing moves to thaw diplomatic ties to mark the 50th anniversary of formal relations with the European Union. Beijing says a new round of bilateral meetings will be held, but did not disclose when EU chiefs Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen would visit the country. Beijing adds that the two sides are expected to conduct high-level dialogues on several areas, including trade and green development. The comments come after China lifted sanctions against 5 EU Parliament members last week. The sanctions were imposed in 2021 over Western measures against Chinese officials accused of the mass detention of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. EU has hailed the move as a step in restoring parliamentary dialogue with China. Beijing's efforts to seek closer relations coincides with improving trade relations, as the two sides agreed to look into setting minimum prices on electric vehicles in April. Last year, the EU imposed tariffs as much as 45.3% on Chinese electric vehicle imports. And for more, CNA's Han Duck-soo, he joins us live from Shanghai. Duck-soo, tell us a bit more about the significance of this visit.
Well, if it takes place, it does mean a further thawing of relations between the two sides. You could say both sides now have a common enemy, or shall we say more politically correctly, a challenge, a common challenge, the US President Donald Trump's tariffs. Now, and both sides are looking at each other for diplomatic support, as well as potential alternative markets for goods originally bound for the US. You can see that outlook in what President Xi said today. The Chinese president called on China and EU to safeguard fairness and justice and to oppose unilateral bullying. Of course, he didn't name names, but we all know what he's referring to. He also said that China is ready to work with the European Council and the European Commission to deepen strategic communication and enhance understanding, as well as mutual trust, and to properly handle friction and differences. Now, today also marks the 50th anniversary of formal relations between China and the EU. So from the looks of it, well, I'll tell you, thanks to Trump's tariffs, it would be a rather warm occasion rather than the frosty one that we were expecting before the Liberation Day tariffs. Now, according to a foreign ministry spokesperson today, the two sides will hold 4 high-level reception events to mark the anniversary. Otelli?
Well, that's right. Duck-soo, thawing of relations comes in the wake of President Trump's tariffs. So what sort of measures have been taken by both sides so far?
Well, Beijing has lifted the sanctions against the 5 EU members of parliament. Those were imposed, as you said, in 2021, thanks to the fallout over alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Now, these sanctions include travel bans, asset freezes, and effectively barred the individuals from entering Chinese territory and engaging in business with Chinese entities. So now all that is no longer in place. Now, earlier this month, EU and China also agreed to look into setting a minimum price on electric vehicles. This minimum price will replace the tariffs imposed by the EU last year on Chinese EVs. It's a win-win solution for both sides. For EU, it means that there would continue to be some breathing room for European car makers even after the tariffs are lifted, because given China's rather cost-effective production chain when it comes to EVs and advances the Chinese EV makers have made in battery charging and other EV technologies, it will be hard for EU car makers to compete within the EU market without some sort of minimum price. That said, it's also a win of sorts for China as well, because even if Chinese EVs cannot compete on price, they can still compete on other features. Besides, the price competition within the Chinese market has been so intense that it's become rather unhealthy for the industry. So a price floor may well be a welcome thing. It makes it profitable for for Chinese EV makers to export to the EU market, albeit possibly at lower numbers, but at a higher profit margin. Now, securing the future, this will secure the future of these EV makers as well as the jobs they generate within China. EU is, after all, China's third largest export destination after ASEAN and the United States. Now, given ASEAN is a fragmented market with different rules for different countries, and the United States is now an unfriendly, highly protected, unviable market, that makes the EU, with its uniform safety standards and rules across countries, the most attractive market for Chinese goods. So while the share of trade has been falling because of frosty relations before, the trade should rise with warming ties. Oteli?
Oh, many thanks for that report on China-EU relations. CNA's Tan Yu Guan live from Shanghai. Meantime, China has condemned Israel's military actions in Gaza shortly after its armed forces said expanded operations in the enclave would displace most of the population. Now, China's foreign ministry says that Beijing is highly concerned about the ongoing war, adding that China hopes all parties can implement a ceasefire agreement. However, earlier today, a senior Hamas official said that there is no point in further talks on a new Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. The comments by Bassem Naim follow Israel's announcement that it may occupy Gaza indefinitely. Well, Israel's military says the aim of their operation is the return of hostages held by Hamas, but the plan would involve capturing Gaza, displacing the majority of its population, and taking control of aid. Israeli officials say the offensive would not begin until after U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to the region next week. Well, Blake Sifton has more from Tel Aviv.
The plan to greatly expand the Israeli ground offensive in Gaza is drawing concern and condemnation from various corners. The families of the 59 hostages still being held in Gaza are outraged. They're very concerned that a ground operation, an expanded ground operation in Gaza could lead to the deaths of their relatives. The umbrella group, the main group representing the family members of the hostages, said in a statement that they are worried and horrified by the danger looming over our loved ones. Indeed, the chief of staff of the Israeli military, Eyal Zamir, is reported to have said yesterday that an expanded ground operation in Gaza could lead to the deaths of additional hostages. Separately, amongst Israeli reservists, there is growing discontent in recent weeks. Many reservists have served multiple tours throughout this war, and several groups of them have written letters to the government urging the government to end the war, to negotiate the release of the hostages, and have accused the government of essentially perpetuating the war for political gain. So with tens of thousands of reservists being called up for this expanded ground operation, those tensions are likely to be exacerbated. In addition to the expanded ground operation, the Israeli military is also expected to initiate a new mechanism for the flow of aid into Gaza after blocking all aid into Gaza for the last 2 months. In the new mechanism that's been suggested, aid would be distributed directly to Palestinian families, Palestinian individuals, by contractors on the ground in Gaza, rather than flowing openly into the Strip and being held in warehouses and distributed by aid groups as it had been. Aid groups and the UN have said that this new strategy is untenable, that it violates the principles of humanitarian action, and the UN has accused Israel of essentially using and restricting aid as a military strategy and a pressure tactic. Blake Sifton, CNA, Tel Aviv.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Taiwan's central bank governor seeks to tamp down speculation on foreign exchange markets following wild swings in the currency. Plus, the ongoing economic uncertainty hitting businesses in New York's iconic Chinatown. We'll bring you a special report ahead on East Asia tonight. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, it's now time for business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, we've been seeing a flurry of interventions by Asian central banks lately. What is behind this sudden action?
Right, Sally. Many of these moves are aimed at stabilizing exchange rates. And while currency fluctuations can reflect economic strength, too much volatility, especially rapid appreciation, can hurt exporters and disrupt capital flows. And that's prompted Hong Kong's central bank to make its biggest move in years to defend the local currency's peg to the US. Now, in its third market intervention since Saturday, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority sold a record $7.8 billion worth of Hong Kong dollars as the greenback's slide pushed the currency to the strong end of its trading band. And that brings total sales since Friday to a hefty 56 billion Hong Kong dollars. Now, Hong Kong's currency peg to the US dollar has been in place since 1983. And since 2005, the authority has intervened to keep the exchange rate within a trading band of 775 to 785 Hong Kong per US dollar. The HKMA says the local currency's recent strength is largely driven by demand from mainland Chinese investors who are buying stocks in one of the world's cheapest major capital markets through the Stock Connect scheme, as well as the appreciation of regional currencies against the greenback. Experts say the escalating trade war between the US and China might benefit Hong Kong, as some of the 286 Chinese companies listed in the US could face delisting risks, and that could lead them to find a listing venue in Hong Kong. Meantime, other Asian currencies are rallying on hopes the US and China will finally reach a trade truce, pushing the dollar lower and optimism higher. China's yuan advanced to a 1.5-month high against the dollar, underpinned by an unwinding of carry trades and a broader rush out of US assets into Asia. Japanese yen also benefiting from the fallout. Now, Taiwan's central bank has also confirmed it stepped in to stabilize the local currency, which has leapt around 10% in the past 2 days alone. It says to have bought US dollars in April, with foreign reserves rising 0.8% to around $583 billion. The Taiwan dollar's record surge in recent sessions has stoked speculation that a revaluation of regional foreign exchange was possible to win US trade concessions. But a revaluation will be painful for the region's export-oriented economies, with some analysts even warning against the risk of a so-called reverse Asian currency crisis. CNA's Victoria Jen has more from Taipei.
There's growing concern in Taiwan's export sector as the new Taiwan dollar continues its sharp rise, jumping nearly 10% against the greenback in just a few days. Exporters are already under a lot of pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats. And when you combine that with the Taiwan dollar gain, it's not a pretty picture. An analyst we spoke to broke it down this way.
尤其是台湾的像机械产业、汽车零组件产业、电机产业，川普的关税已经至少有10%，让他们感受到压力。这时候新台币在短短几天之内又升值升了10%，所以厂商等于在成本上面临了20%的压力。这个对于外销产业来说是很难接受的，因为外销产业通常它的毛利都非常的低。这时候如果来个20%的关税，再加汇率的话，他们很难在短时间之内消化。
The impact on the economy could potentially be substantial, given Taiwan's heavy reliance on exports. The double whammy of a stronger Taiwan dollar and the U.S. tariffs will hit everyone, including its biggest companies like TSMC and MediaTek. That's because most of their revenue comes in U.S. dollars, but their costs are in a local currency. So when the Taiwan dollar strengthens, their profit margins take a hit. President William Lai has weighed in on the currency surge, saying that the spike was market-driven and not tied to any secret deals in the U.S.-Taiwan trade talks. He stressed that exchange rates were not even discussed and urged the public not to be misled by speculation. Regardless, his government is now under even greater pressure to find ways to support exporters as they navigate what's shaping up to be a very volatile economic future. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
South Korean airports saw a significant rise in passenger traffic this year. The number of people flying from South Korea to Japan hit a record high in the first 4 months of this year. Government data showed approximately 49,000 people use Incheon International Airport daily in April. Now, at that rate, the total passenger number estimated to have reached over 9 million during the January to April period. And that's an increase of nearly 9% as compared to the same period last year, highlighting a strong rebound in international travel. A key driver behind the surge is the growing number of flights to Japan, fueled by expanded airline routes and attractive promotional travel packages. Meanwhile, traffic to China has also climbed sharply following Beijing's implementation of a visa-free policy for Korean travelers in November. 5.72 million passengers flew to China between November and March, and that's a 29% jump from a year ago. Chinese travelers' spending rose 8% on year over the May Day holidays to close to $25 billion. This is still off pre-pandemic levels, however. The expenditure figure is watched as a barometer of China's economy. Official figures show a 6.5% increase in the number of trips, but total spending per head over the 5-day holiday period rose just 1.5%, suggesting still a cautious approach to consumer spending. Another economic indicator, the private sector Caixin Services Purchasing Managers Index, still showing signs of expansion in the month of April. Now, the Caixin China General Composite PMI fell to 51.1 in April from 51.8 the previous month, still managing to stay above the 50 mark, which divides expansion from contraction. But activity grew at the slower pace in the first 7 months, weighed down by uncertainty caused by U.S. tariffs. China's largest trade fair, the Canton Fair, has wrapped up with its spring edition with a surprising twist. Now, despite a sluggish start and the absence of most American buyers, the 3-week event clocked growth thanks to a record overseas attendance. Held twice a year, the fair is a key platform for Chinese exporters to strike global deals. Now, transaction volumes edged up nearly 3% from a year ago, topping more than $25 billion. Fueling that growth, a surge in overseas buyers. Attendance jumped over 17% on year as nearly 290,000 buyers visited the fair. First-timers made up almost 60% of the crowd. Still, the rebound isn't complete. Despite the record footfall, business volumes haven't fully bounced back to pre-pandemic levels when the fair generated close to $30 billion. Seen as a barometer for China's trade and manufacturing trends, the fair's results suggest a stronger export outlook in the months ahead. Analysts say the boost in turnover, for this year is lifting confidence that the export sector and strengthens belief in China's ability to weather a prolonged trade war with the U.S. China's CATL, that's the world's biggest EV battery maker, is reportedly gauging investor interest for a secondary listing that could fetch up to $5 billion. If successful, it may be Hong Kong's biggest IPO in years, according to Bloomberg. Now, reported that the Chinese battery giant began investor education meetings today. Sources say that Hong Kong trading debut could come as early as this month. Remember, CATL is pushing ahead despite Trump's tariffs rattling global markets, and the deal's scale means that its success could shape investor sentiment towards Chinese firms, especially as IPOs in the US and Europe slow down. Investors seem to respond positively. CATL shares rose modestly in Shenzhen trade today. Despite a 12% drop this year, weighed down by broader market concerns, this latest move could mark a turning point in sentiment. Some businesses in New York's Chinatown will be soon forced to close because of Donald Trump's trade war. A group that supports local companies say the task has been made more difficult by the ongoing economic uncertainty. Mitch McCann visited the neighborhood in Lower Manhattan to see how decisions made in Washington are affecting the community.
As tranquil music drifts through New York's Chinatown, it gives the impression of peacefulness and calm, a reminder of what many Chinese immigrants sought when moving to New York. But the path to the American dream is rarely a straightforward one. And in this bustling neighborhood of culture and commerce, life has become more difficult since Donald Trump became president.
This is 24-karat gold. They all make in China.
For the last 37 years, Eva Sam has owned popular jewellery on Canal Street, designing and selling pieces, some worth many thousands of dollars. Her walls are adorned with Hollywood's who's who, aka her customers, which reportedly include Beyonce and Usain Bolt, making her a celebrity around here too. Eva sources some of her gold and polished jade from China, which has become embroiled in a trade war with Donald Trump's America. And her business is suffering, with a significant drop in sales.
We lose about 50%.
Wow. In early April, President Trump implemented sweeping tariffs on nearly all countries, but imposed them at different rates depending on who he felt had been the most unfair trading partner to the US. He believes China is the biggest offender, with his administration gradually increasing tariffs on Chinese imports to the United States. They are now set at a whopping rate of 145%. Businesses are left scrambling to keep up and say long-term planning can feel impossible.
點解咧？好難就係話，因為佢一陣時又講140%，一陣時又話245%，一陣時又話50%。我哋唯有暫時係加住10%，唔使加咁多。睇下遲啲佢會唔會改變，唔好加咁多。
Adding to the confusion are comments from President Trump that trade talks are underway with China, something flatly denied by the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
Business owners here in Chinatown have suffered setbacks before. In 2001, the 9/11 terror attacks not far from here severely impacted the local economy. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy tore through here, leaving a trail of destruction. And less than 10 years later, the COVID-19 pandemic forced many business owners here in Chinatown to close their doors for good. And we're told that Donald Trump's tariffs could cause the same thing to happen again.
Wellington Chen from the advocacy group, the Chinatown Partnership, hasn't just been taking pictures of the neighbourhood, he's been taking stock of how business owners are impacted.
One thing for sure, in all my surveys, even just now, the prices have gone up. The prices have all gone up.
Wellington says merchants are stockpiling as many products as they can from their suppliers before they see the costs of the levies filter through on imports from China. He says it's inevitable some businesses won't survive, but there are no projections yet on how many.
Prior to this, the cost of inflation is already going up. And so this certainly does not help because the election result was meant to help ease the pressure. Instead, this is going the opposite direction.
No plans have been reported by the city to provide financial relief to businesses, but Wellington says that even if there were, it's unlikely they would make up for the losses owners have incurred here in recent years. Back at Popular Jewellery, Eva tells us that this adversarial approach to trade isn't good for anyone and that business should benefit both countries. She's going to try and figure out how to produce some of the goods domestically that usually come from China and will be ordering less from there for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, the Chinatown business owner is focused on new payment plans and other incentives for customers to help ensure that they keep coming through the door. Something that may prove more and more difficult in Chinatown as this district is forced to fight for survival yet again. Mitch McCann, CNA, New York.
And that is the latest in business. Kelly.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea's former Prime Minister doubles down on running for the presidential election next month, a move that could potentially split the conservative vote. And US lawmakers push for a bill that will track AI chips in a bid to foil smuggling attempts. Hello again, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China says it will welcome visits by top EU leaders, with Chinese President Xi Jinping calling on the bloc to oppose what he calls unilateral bullying, as Beijing seeks to forge closer ties with Brussels amid its bruising trade war with Washington. China also says it opposes Israel's military actions in Gaza, after its armed forces said to have expanded operations in the territory would include displacing most of its population. France has also strongly condemned Israel's new military campaign in Gaza. South Korea's presidential hopeful Han Duck-soo vows to team up with the conservative election candidate, emphasizing the need to run on a unity ticket to take on liberal frontrunner Lee Jae-myung. Well, let's stay with that story. The race for South Korea's top political office has gotten more complicated as the country's conservatives struggle to settle on just one candidate. A former Prime Minister, Han Duck-soo, has doubled down on running as a conservative candidate of choice for the country's presidential election next month. He is currently registered as an independent. He says his experience makes him the better choice for leading the country, which faces uncertain headwinds due to the trade war initiated by the Trump administration.
한미 간 통상 문제를 가장 오래 다뤄온 사람, 가장 잘할 수 있는 사람은 바로 저라고 생각합니다. 양국이 서로 도움이 될 수 있는 윈윈 할 수 있는 방안을 이끌어 내겠습니다.
Mr. Han is seeking to run as a unified candidate with former Labour Minister Kim Moon-soo of the People's Power Party. Mr. Kim, however, has accused his party of refusing to acknowledge him as the party's candidate, even though he won the nomination on Saturday. Well, South Korea will head to the polls next month to elect its president, as the country seeks to bring an end to months of political chaos following the short-lived declaration of martial law last December by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. China has slammed recruitment advertisements by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency as political provocation.
美方不仅对中国恶意抹黑攻击，而且公然蛊惑、诱骗中方人员投靠，甚至直接打中国政府官员的主意，这是对中国国家利益的严重侵犯，是赤裸裸的政治挑衅。中方对此强烈谴责。
The U.S. intelligence agency last week released 2 videos in Mandarin that CIA Director John Ratcliffe said in a statement to AP News Agency are, quote, aimed at recruiting Chinese officials to steal secrets. Well, the incident is the latest rift between the world's top 2 economies that have seen both sides trading accusations of espionage. Now, a U.S. lawmaker is planning to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to push for the tracking of computer chips used for artificial intelligence in a bid to foil smuggling attempts. A Reuters report says the move targets NVIDIA chips, which is said to be frequently smuggled into China in violation of U.S. export control laws. Well, the bill, if passed, will direct American regulators to draft rules to track chips to ensure they're used at a location they are authorized to be. And if they are not properly licensed under export controls, they will be prevented from operating. The bill is reported to command strong bipartisan support, and it comes amid heightened U.S. tensions with China on the tech front. Bill Foster, the U.S. representative behind the legislation, called the issue not an imaginary future problem, as the chips could be used by China to design weapons. Well, the flow of such chips into China has been previously documented, with NVIDIA claiming that it is unable to track its products after they are sold. But tech experts quoted by Reuters say that such tracking technologies do exist, but the implementation is believed to be a challenge. All right, time now for some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. RTHK says that Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee will lead a 50-strong delegation to Qatar and Kuwait this Saturday. The aim is to explore business opportunities and drive people-to-people ties. The group includes representatives from both the city and mainland China. This marks Mr. Lee's second trip to the Middle East since taking office. Taiwan News, meanwhile, says the island's first locally built submarine is in the final phase of being readied for sea acceptance trials. The trials were scheduled to begin in April, but problems emerged during the harbour acceptance tests, causing delays. Still, the Navy says it expects the Haikun or Narwhal to be commissioned in November as planned. Over in Japan, Kyodo News says former Emperor Akihito has been admitted to University of Tokyo Hospital for a heart checkup after doctors found signs of possible myocardial ischemia from an examination last month. The condition reduces blood flow to heart muscles. The 91-year-old has not complained of any symptoms so far. The last time the former monarch was hospitalized was back in 2012 for a coronary artery bypass surgery. India will conduct mock civil defense drills tomorrow amid tensions with Pakistan. The announcement follows Islamabad's second missile test in 3 days. Now, the standoff was triggered by a terror attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir that India blames on Pakistan. Well, India's Home Affairs Ministry has asked several states to conduct mock drills. This would include rehearsing an evacuation plan and the training of civilians and students to protect themselves in the event of a hostile attack. Drills will also reportedly test air raid warning sirens. And Ishan Garg tells us how India will likely carry out these mock drills.
The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for the internal security of the country, says that in light of the recent geopolitical tensions, it says that it would be prudent to test out its civil defense preparedness. As we understand, these drills will be carried out in 244 out of roughly 800 districts in India. And now these are districts that have been classified as civil defense districts. A lot of these are close to the border between India and Pakistan, and this is where these drills are going to be carried out on May the 7th. Now, what we know is going to happen during these drills is that the civil defense forces are going to check their preparedness, which would include checking if the rescue operation teams are working fine, if the fire department is able to communicate with the rest of the team, as well as testing out some critical civil defense infrastructure as well. That includes testing out if the communication between these defense centers, as well as the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army, if that communication system is working well, as well as they will test out if these local teams can camouflage critical infrastructure like power lines and power stations well as well. And as you pointed out, this will have an element of training students and civilians in facets of civil defense. And now this is the first time since 1971 that these exercises are being carried out. 1971 was when India and Pakistan tensions had escalated into a full-blown war. So this is now sending a message to the Indian public that things have indeed escalated between India and Pakistan to a whole different level. As we have seen in the past few days, Indian Navy carrying out military drills just a few nautical miles away from Pakistan's maritime borders. And in the past couple of days, we have seen Pakistan also test firing its missiles in the same area.
Well, Iran has offered to mediate. Its top diplomat held talks in Pakistan and plans to visit India on Thursday. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif in Islamabad. Well, he's the first senior foreign diplomat to wade into the fray with visits to both sides. Tehran says that it will spare no effort to help de-escalate the situation. Pakistani leader Sharif has cancelled a visit to Malaysia as his team's intelligence has suggested that India could launch an attack.
We will demonstrate full patience. We will exercise restraint. On behalf of Pakistan, I give my word, we will not be the first one to do any escalatory move or action.
So why is Iran offering to mediate between India and Pakistan? Geographically, all three are next to each other in the same region. Iran shares a border with Pakistan. The Iranian government believes a conflict must be avoided at all costs, as it would be destabilizing to the region. Well, Tehran considers both India and Pakistan as brothers and neighbors with deep ties going back centuries. According to Tehran Times, Iran sees itself as being uniquely positioned to serve as a bridge and a neutral party, providing space for dialogue. It also believes it can offer a pragmatic approach. Its role as a mediator could be more effective and acceptable to both sides due to its geographical location, cultural proximity, and historical ties. Well, Pakistan reportedly has no objection to Iran acting as a mediator. As for India, local media report that New Delhi has never accepted any offer of mediation by any third country on bilateral issues. And for more of our coverage on the Kashmir terror attack, do head onto our website, cna.asia, for stories such as this one on UN Chief Antonio Guterres urging de-escalation and restraint between the nuclear-armed rivals. Our break's up next. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, Singapore businesses will soon have a better way to measure the carbon footprint of their products. How will it boost efforts by Singapore and the region to achieve net zero targets? Plus, leading the way for Chinese snooker as a sport crowns its first world champion from China. Well, the race for artificial intelligence dominance is not just a US-China contest. As Washington tightens controls on tech exports and Beijing doubles down on self-reliance, Asia's broader innovation ecosystem is stepping into the spotlight. Now, at the recent Founders Forum in Singapore, investors and entrepreneurs say that shifting geopolitics are opening new doors, not closing them. Roland Lim reports on how the region is turning disruption into opportunity.
As geopolitical tensions mount between the US and China, Asia is rethinking its place in the global tech race and betting big on artificial intelligence. Global Entrepreneur Support Community, the Founders Forum group, has seen US investments in Asia rise from single percentage points to double in less than a year.
We're also seeing a lot more interest from US investment into the region, and that has only started to grow. So, this market was valued at over 400 billion last year alone, and there's plenty of investment coming through for new innovations like this in this space.
Singapore is committing around $740 million over the next 5 years to enhance its AI capabilities, including infrastructure and talent development. In South Korea, the government plans to invest $22.6 billion in AI, semiconductors, and other advanced technologies over the same period. Japan is also making significant strides, pledging more than $65 billion to support its semiconductor and AI sectors by 2030.
As the decoupling of U.S. and China continues to increase, you probably will see an interesting sort of subsequent increase in innovation in places like Singapore, in places like Korea, and places like Japan, that are primarily the beneficiaries of sort of these developments overall.
Despite the surge in government spending, venture capital investments in these countries have experienced a downturn. In Singapore, venture funding dropped by 52% on year in the first 9 months of 2024, marking the lowest levels since 2020. Japan faces challenges with its startup ecosystem, with many companies struggling to scale up as well as a lack of late-stage funding. While challenges remain in attracting private venture capital, Southeast Asian digital payments platform Zendit sees a promising future for AI development across the region.
The sheer size of Southeast Asia and the kind of growth we've been experiencing, I understand right now investors are still a little bit cautious, but the reality is Southeast Asia, by 2030, we're going to grow into a 1 trillion market.
The combination of substantial government investments and strategic international partnerships is creating a fertile ground for technological advancements. From fintech to health tech, Asia's startups aren't just catching up, they're building fast, and local markets are eager to adopt. For Asia's AI ecosystem, shifting geopolitics isn't a roadblock. It's a runway, and the next wave of global innovation may just take off from here. Roland Lim, CNA, Singapore.
Singapore Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean has called on Southeast Asia to connect national grids to realise a low-carbon future. Well, he says the region should develop nature-based carbon solutions, as well as build stronger partnerships between the public and private sectors to increase green investments. Now, he says these should be done even as governments and businesses are under pressure to focus on immediate concerns amid global uncertainties. Mr. Teo was speaking at the opening of Ecosperity Week.
The reality is that climate change will not wait for the world to find its footing. Nature sets the pace, not us, and will not wait for countries and businesses to act. The impact of climate change is increasingly apparent, and Asia will be among the hardest hit.
Now, CNA's Ilakia Selvaraju was also at Ecosperity Week, and she spoke to Peter Baker, president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, about the role companies can play in global decarbonization.
Globally, we're not hitting the targets. We're not likely to hit the 2030 targets, and science is becoming ever more urgent. This morning in the opening sessions here in Ecosperity, I think it was your senior minister, Theo, who said very clearly, this will require finance, this will require policy, and this will require technology. I would add to that from a corporate point of view, we need to create the economic incentives for businesses to transform. What is the business case for such a transformation? Business cases are super simple. You need data in order to make a business case, to see where the benefits are. And that's where a pact methodology, greenhouse gas protocol, and the partnership with this registration are so key.
Well, you mentioned about having economic incentive. What are other sort of resources or support systems that you think will be needed to achieve net zero?
Well, I think, again, I can best speak on behalf of business. We really need to reskill management in many areas. It takes boards of companies to take the lead. We need to leave the mindset behind that this is about compliance. It's not. This is about competitiveness. This is about future-proofing your business. Then, in order for these strategic imperatives to be implemented, operational management needs to not just know how to run the finance of a business, but we always say we need to start running carbon the way we manage money. The minute we achieve that, better data, better decisions, better performance, better results for capital markets, and then we will unlock the finance, which is one of the blockers.
China has its first world champion in the sport of snooker, with Zhao Xintong claiming a historic victory in the final of the World Snooker Championship in Sheffield, England. Zhao swept to the final in a run that included a stunning semi-final win over seven-time champion Ronnie O'Sullivan. What's more remarkable is the 28-year-old making a comeback from a 20-month ban after being involved in a match-fixing scandal and had to get through 4 rounds of qualifying just to reach the main rounds of the Crucible. In the final, Zhao took on a 3-time winner, Mark Williams, who was looking to become the game's oldest world champion at the age of 50, when his younger opponent, nicknamed the Cyclone, swept to a 11-6 overnight lead before holding off a spirited fight back from Williams to close out a resounding 18-12 victory. Now, many Chinese netizens cheered the breakthrough on social media platform Weibo with messages of joy and congratulations. Now, the hashtag Zhao Xintong wins World Championship scored a spot among the top trending stories, chalking up at least 140 million views and 60,000 comments so far. A Hong Kong watchmaker dependent on U.S. sales found his watch brand at the cliff's edge when Washington, as part of its trade war with China, announced high tariffs as well as the axing of a de minimis rule that allowed low-value packages to enter the U.S. duty-free. Now, most watchmaking kits sold by DIY Watch Club are destined for the United States. But since 2nd of May, those packages were subject to a 90% or a flat fee of $75. Well, the impact to the company's U.S. revenue is estimated to be around 20 to 30%.
Our brand was created to be a very U.S.-centric brand. So prior to this whole situation, we had over 80% shipping to U.S., I would say. So when the tariff first hit, it was actually pretty bad. So we were literally considering downsizing the company, and it was going to be game over.
But with some quick thinking, Mr. Lee turned his marketing efforts to target Japan and Europe instead. Now, these markets, he believes, will do better than Southeast Asia for his particular industry.
Growing these markets will allow me to rely less on the U.S. market. And hopefully, eventually, U.S. would be like, let's say, 15% of my portfolio. I think that would be a safer place to be.
Now, Mr. Lee's company is just one of the many examples of businesses hit by U.S. tariffs. And for many of them, America could well be their largest source of revenue.
No one single market can replace the U.S. Probably 20, 30 markets together would have a similar size, but that would mean a lot of extra work. So I think Hong Kong traders, they need to look further. Probably in the long run, even look to the African market.
And staying in Hong Kong, the annual Bun Festival held at Chung Chau Island drew thousands of visitors. The 5-day festival, which wrapped up earlier this morning, blends modern culture with century-old traditions. And the highlight was a bun scrambling competition. It featured a 14-meter-tall tower studded with 9,000 plastic buns. Participants must climb up, grab as many buns as possible, and return to the ground, all within 3 minutes. The higher the buns, the more points they hold.
作為女仔嘅話，我覺得係勇於嘗試咯，去多嘗試。因為當初我搶包山咧，就係因為好奇啦，所以去想嘗試就直至到開始學識攀石啊，或者等等其他嘅運動咯。只要肯嘗試嘅話，係可能有一日你都成為包山猴。
Steeped in tradition that dates all the way back to the 1800s. Residents had used the white steam buns as offerings to deities in exchange for repelling evil spirits. Now, the buns, filled with sweet bean paste, represent good fortune, and they're also often stamped with the Chinese characters for peace and safety. And that's all we've got for you this Tuesday on East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia, and look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.